In different cultures around the world, ancient stories mention secret societies that operate from the shadows, shaping the course of humanity with invisible hands. But among so many orders and organizations shrouded in mystery, there is one that rarely appears in the most popular speculations. Their names are not engraved on monuments, nor stamped on historical documents. Their existence is preserved only in whispers, discreet codes, and traditions passed down from mother to daughter. It is known as the Order of the Mothers of Darkness. Composed exclusively of women, this underground sisterhood is said to have spanned centuries, manipulating power structures, using ancient rituals, silent alliances, and a cleverly woven network of blackmail. Politicians, artists, religious leaders, all at some point would have crossed paths with these women who hide beneath the veneer of high society. But what if this order is not just a dark myth? What if they really exist, shaping the world without anyone noticing? Welcome to another night where mysteries never sleep. I'm Midnight, and this is 7 Nights. Before we begin, I'd like to ask for your help. Like the video, comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's just one click, but it makes a huge difference for YouTube to show the videos to more people, and for me to keep bringing this content to you. I'm counting on you. Let's get into the video. When we talk about secret societies, the most commonly mentioned names almost always belong to men: Masons, Illuminati, Templars. But amid these well-documented structures, something remains on the margins, almost invisible. An organization that never needed to be declared, because it always knew how to hide. Women who, throughout history, operated without leaving visible traces. But the signs are there, for those who know how to look. In excavations in ancient Sumer, archaeologists found records that are not studied with the same attention as the epics of Gilgamesh. Texts that mention priestesses called Entu, women who commanded temples, interpreted the skies, and performed rituals in upper chambers from which scribes were forbidden to approach. The most curious thing? These ceremonies always involved 13 women, a number that reappears in other cultures far apart from each other. Coincidence? As civilizations evolved, this feminine pattern faded from official records, but not from underground ones. In Babylonian times, the Natita lived reclusively in temples, with financial autonomy and a peculiar authority. Some of them answered to no one, not even kings. In certain recovered texts from UR, it is possible to see lunar symbols beside the names of these women, symbols that also appear in Egyptian relics and Eleusinian rituals of Greece. How did Sumerian symbols end up in Greek manuscripts 1,000 years later? The Eleusinian mysteries are particularly interesting. In them, there are reports of women who participated in night ceremonies, received visions, and were led by a central figure known as the matriarch. The details of these rituals were protected by the strictest vow of silence in antiquity. But some scholars have noted that, even within the patriarchal structure of Greece, these women influenced political decisions discreetly, through their husbands or patrons. What if these matriarchs were the direct heirs of knowledge dating back to Sumer? In the Middle Ages, the supposed extinction of this type of order is actually a perfect disguise. The Inquisition burned witches, but who were these women, really? In Spanish archives, there are records of trials in which the accused were described as ladies of knowledge, who gathered in closed groups, used ancient languages, and had unexpected influence over feudal lords. The trial of Marguerite de la Croix in 1481 mentions that she knew of arranged marriages before even the families involved did. How? Jumping to the Renaissance, we find a Venetian document from 1512 that usually goes unnoticed. It is the inventory of a noblewoman accused of heresy. Among her possessions was a ring inscribed with Mater and Umbra, and the drawing of a two-headed serpent. This same image appears discreetly in stained glass windows of a cathedral in Germany, and in an anonymous 17th century grimoire. 3 different locations, 3 different centuries, and the same symbol. In Paris, during the 18th century, women's salons became centers of intellectual influence. But some of them had curious rules. The meetings took place only at night, only women could enter, and no papers could be taken outside. A network informally called the 12 Voices is mentioned in private letters between aristocrats. They not only gave opinions on politics, they knew of wars before newspapers announced them. Who fed them this information? These circles also trained young women. Some were prepared to infiltrate wealthy families, others into convents and cultural institutions. But all of them learned a strange kind of oral language, combining Latin phrases with unusual intonations. There is no written record of this language, and that is no accident. Protecting this code was a top priority. A language spoken only sounds like something ideal to preserve a lineage of secrets, doesn't it? During the 19th century, in England, an intriguing figure emerges named Elizabeth Hargrove. Officially, she was just a lady of high society, but there are indications that she held private meetings with 3 prime ministers and had direct access to military documents. Letters signed by her were found hidden behind paintings in a mansion mysteriously burned down in 1883. These letters used a system of symbols that has never been fully deciphered. What did she know that needed to be buried with her? Already in the 20th century, a name reappears in secret French archives, Madame Elon. A polyglot woman with no official identity, seen at diplomatic meetings and military gatherings, but who never signed anything. Her presence always coincided with abrupt shifts in attitude among generals and ministers. One detail stands out. She was seen at private dinners with actresses, journalists, and politicians' wives. What was discussed at these gatherings? With the digitization of information, many expected secret structures to vanish. But the Mothers of Darkness, if they indeed exist, adapted better than any other group. They use cultural foundations, NGOs, art institutes, and even universities as fronts. The difference now is that manipulation is done remotely, without proper names, only functions. But there is always a woman in charge. Why have these women never claimed the spotlight? Perhaps because real power doesn't need a stage. It only needs silence, time, and continuity. One of the most intriguing characteristics of the Mothers of Darkness is the way they pass on their knowledge. Unlike other secret orders that operate through public initiations or group ceremonies, this sisterhood cultivates an almost invisible lineage, passed exclusively between generations of women from the same bloodline, mother to daughter, always. This tradition does not rely on books, scrolls, or archives. The knowledge is oral, symbolic, ritualistic. Each generation carries within itself a part of the whole, not just information, but techniques, practices, and specific commands. Esoteric researchers call this blood memory, a form of knowledge preservation transmitted not only through speech, but through living together, behavior, and even ritualistic bodily markings which, according to some sources, are made in early childhood. In 1989, a French ethnologist, Bernard Gallant, published a study not officially recognized, in which he investigated isolated families in the interior of Brittany. In 3 of them, he found unusual patterns: girls educated in ancient languages, nighttime rituals in enclosed spaces, and the presence of a matriarchal grandmother, who was not called by name but by a title, Mère Noire. Gallant tried to publish his findings, but disappeared in 1991. His material was only recovered years later in a clandestine sale of rare documents. Similar reports appear in rural areas of Romania, where elderly women maintain ritualistic practices involving herbs and chants in dead languages like Dacian and primitive forms of Greek. What's surprising is not the practice itself, common in folk cultures, but the pattern of organization. There is always a silent hierarchy, with a single woman at the center and younger ones who accompany her in silence. None of these young women give interviews. They all simply say, "The story is not ours to tell." This code of silence also manifests in the so-called black houses, a term that appears in judicial archives from Hungary and Ukraine. These were remote homes, always owned by women who received no male visitors. In police investigations conducted between 1930 and 1960, there are mentions of monthly gatherings that took place under the guidance of a veiled lady. The women entered in ordinary clothes and left dressed in dark robes. They never carried anything with them. But according to neighbors, their behavior changed after those meetings. What happened inside? A more recent theory, gaining traction in alternative academic circles, suggests that part of these women's knowledge is encoded in gestures. A refined, almost imperceptible body language used to pass instructions in public spaces without drawing attention. This would explain why so many women associated with the sisterhood occupy roles in discreet environments: librarians, museum curators, interpreters, cultural consultants. Places where silence is the rule and eyes are always watching. A curious case involved the personal translator of a European minister who, during a conference in Vienna, was seen making a subtle hand gesture toward another woman in the audience. The gesture, seemingly harmless, was captured on camera and analyzed by body language experts. It was identical to a sign present in a Renaissance painting by Botticelli, The Calumny of Apelles, which depicts female figures surrounded by hidden symbols. How did a gesture from a 15th century artwork appear in a contemporary conference? The use of art as a means of symbolic transmission is not new. But in the case of the Mothers of Darkness, there seems to be a selective curation. Works with recurring elements, like the two-headed serpent, the number 13, female figures in a circle, frequently appear in private collections owned by European aristocratic women. Many of these works are not available to the public. Could they be used as visual manuals of hidden instructions? Another important element of this transmission is silence. Not casual silence, but ritualized silence. Daughters raised in environments where certain things cannot be asked, where curiosity is not punished, but met with the absence of response. This strategy, according to scholars of cult behavior, is common in initiatory structures. The lack of information creates dependency and strengthens the bond with the source. In the case of the sisterhood, the source is always the mother, or the eldest woman in the lineage. This subtle control also extends to memory. In interviews conducted with descendants of noble families in Italy, women reported that their mothers sang lullabies with strange lyrics, which didn't follow common patterns. When asked about their meaning, the answers were always vague. Linguists who analyzed the melodies discovered that some phrases repeated grammatical constructions from Proto-Indo-European, a language older than Latin, who still sings songs in a language extinct for millennia. All of this points to a disconcerting possibility. Perhaps the Mothers of Darkness are not merely an organized order, but a continuous project. A living organism, passed between generations with ritual precision, adapted to the changing times, yet never losing its core. That core is not just knowledge. It is control, it is technique, it is strategy. And at the center of it all lies the idea that power is not learned, it is inherited. But this inheritance doesn't come with a last name, nor with fortune. It comes in the silence of a grandmother, the discreet gesture of a mother, or a strange lullaby heard in childhood. How do you fight something that never presents itself as an enemy? Perhaps the true strength of these women does not lie in their magic, but in the way they've hidden their very existence for millennia while being everywhere. If there's one thing we've learned from observing history, it's that the one holding the pen isn't always the one writing the rules. Many of the most decisive moments in global politics were born far from palaces and parliaments. And if there exists a sisterhood that operates invisibly, it would be almost inevitable for them to have their hands in some of these decisions. Discreetly, precisely, without ever signing their name. Throughout the centuries, certain female figures have emerged behind the scenes of politics with a kind of power no one could explain. They didn't hold official positions, but moved among ministers, ambassadors, kings, and presidents as if they were part of the state machinery. Rarely were their names recorded, and when they were, they came with vague descriptions like cultural consultant or patron of strategic thought. During the French Revolution, for example, the Parisian salons led by influential women were not just literary gatherings. They functioned as neutral zones where revolutionary ideas were shaped, discreet alliances formed, and future leaders decided on stances. The question is, who guided these meetings? Who decided who could or couldn't enter? Lesser-known accounts suggest that on some of those nights, the hostess wasn't the central figure, but rather an older woman who watched in silence, listened to everything, and spoke only to a select few. Always at the end of the night, never in public. In personal records of some politicians from that era, these women are mentioned only as the shadows. In the 20th century, the signs became more sophisticated. In 1919, during the negotiations of the Treaty of Versailles, there are records of a translator who accompanied members of the Italian delegation. Her name does not appear in official documents, but in private letters, a diplomat refers to her as the invisible guide. Shortly after, Italy's stance in the negotiations changed radically. Coincidence? Cases like this repeat themselves. In Brazil, during the military dictatorship, intelligence reports mention a woman who attended diplomatic events, but was never listed officially. She was described only as Madame D. No one knew her origin, but ministers and generals listened to her attentively. She gave no orders. She merely suggested, and her suggestions became decisions. In the United States, the most curious case was that of First Lady Edith Wilson. When President Woodrow Wilson suffered a stroke, Edith began to control what he read, whom he spoke with, and which topics he was allowed to address. For months, she was the bridge between the government and the outside world. Officially, she was just a wife. But in practice, who was really governing? This kind of power, indirect, silent, subtle, is the trademark of a much more organized operation than it seems. When such figures appear in different countries, following the same pattern of action, it's impossible not to raise the question: what if they aren't isolated cases? What if they are part of a larger, much older network? Researchers who study political influence networks show that small informal groups, when positioned strategically, can divert the course of decisions far more effectively than any official body. What if the mothers of darkness mastered this technique centuries ago? They don't impose. They suggest. They don't threaten. They reveal at the right moment. And with that, they control. When a politician backs down without explanation, when a law changes suddenly, when alliances dissolve out of nowhere, who is pulling those strings? In some interviews with retired aides, the figure of the woman who knew too much always emerges, someone who was officially no one, but everyone listened to. None of these women appear in official archives, but all left traces in historic decisions. If all of this is just coincidence, why is there always someone watching, listening, saying little, but who seems to move the pieces as if she knows the entire board? If the mothers of darkness truly operate behind powerful institutions, wouldn't it be logical for them to also act within the industry that shapes dreams, ideas, and behavior? Entertainment, more than any other field, influences the collective imagination. And it is precisely for this reason that many researchers have begun turning their eyes toward this industry as a possible front and stage for coded messages, silent manipulation, and symbolic recruitment. One of the subtlest yet recurring signs is hidden symbolism. Dresses with repetitive patterns, discrete tattoos, hand positioning in photographs, or seemingly random objects in music videos and films. At film and music award ceremonies, symbols like the Ouroboros, a snake in a circle, the inverted spiral, and the number 13 appear more frequently than statistics would allow. Are they mere aesthetic choices, or signs of affiliation? In 2009, an award-winning actress wore a dress inscribed with writings in a mix of archaic Hebrew and vulgar Latin. Linguists analyzed the words and found fragments of an ancestral invocation related to the figure of Hecate, a goddess associated with the night, witchcraft, and the crossroads between worlds. No explanation was given. No interview was granted. Yet this kind of symbolic expression continued to appear at various events around the world. It's not just clothing. In film scripts, there are sequences that seem disconnected from the narrative, but contain elements that align with ancient rituals. A clear example is in a 2014 acclaimed, award-winning film where the protagonist walks down a candlelit hallway while repeating seemingly nonsensical phrases. When reorganized, these phrases form an ancient Sumerian chant translated in archaeological studies from the University of Chicago. Why is a Sumerian chant in a contemporary film? And the pattern repeats in music videos. In 2017, a globally known pop singer released a video showing a circle of women in black robes chanting words in an invented language. Phonetics experts recognized sounds consistent with Proto-Etruscan, a dead language. The choreography, when analyzed frame by frame, mirrored gestures described by 19th century occultists in lunar rituals. Are we witnessing art or ritual performance in disguise? Another curious aspect is the rise of certain celebrities. Some seem to appear out of nowhere with no consistent background, yet gain immediate access to million-dollar contracts, major events, and global platforms. Many share similar patterns: ties to powerful female figures behind the scenes, attendance at elite schools, and sudden public image transformations, often accompanied by some symbolic element. Coincidence or a rite of passage? Behind the scenes of the industry, silence is the norm. Costume, makeup, and photography professionals who've worked with major stars report, in anonymous accounts, that some photo shoots follow strange rules: specific hours, lighting controlled by an external coordinator, and the presence of women who are not part of the official crew but observe everything without interacting. Who are these observers? In the music world, there are curious records. Some lyrics seem to describe mystical experiences, contact with entities, or spiritual journeys that don't match the artist's public background. In interviews, many avoid elaborating. A striking example occurred with a British singer who stated in a documentary that her songs came ready during the night and that she simply received them. When asked what that meant, she laughed and changed the subject. International festivals also display intriguing patterns. Stage designs that repeat ancient symbolic configurations, such as inverted triangles, mirrors facing the audience, and circular structures aligned with lunar phases. The timing of certain performances coincides with esoteric dates, solstices, equinoxes, black moons. These are details that escape the general public, but follow a precise ritualistic coherence. There is also the element of collective catharsis. At large concerts, the audience takes part in visual and auditory experiences that alter emotional states en masse. Psychologists call this symbolic trance. But what if part of these events is structured not just to entertain, but to condition or guide emotions on a large scale? That could explain why certain artists involved in these practices have fan bases that verge on fanaticism, with their own language, codes, and even internal behavioral rules. Of course, all of this could be mere coincidence. But what do we make of old interviews where renowned actresses mention that they follow the advice of an older woman who never appears in public but is always there? Who are these silent figures who accompany stars from the start of their careers and are never credited? If there's a stage, there are also curtains. And those who run the show are rarely the ones under the spotlight. Perhaps the true function of the entertainment industry, for this sisterhood, is precisely that, to dazzle with brilliance while the ritual unfolds in the shadows. No organization remains hidden for centuries through silence and symbols alone. To preserve its existence, especially in positions of influence, control is necessary. And control, when it doesn't come from voluntary loyalty, must be imposed. In the case of the Mothers of Darkness, all signs suggest that one of their most effective weapons has always been blackmail, silent, ruthless, impossible to prove. This is not about common threats. Accounts point to a level of sophistication far beyond the exposure of personal secrets. What's at stake are information networks as ancient as they are well protected, capable of unearthing forgotten family scandals, hidden documents, and even manipulating judicial decisions. These are pieces that, once placed on the board, cannot be removed. The person involved remains trapped. A striking example emerged in 1994, when a European politician suddenly resigned from his post as chancellor, citing personal reasons. Weeks later, rumors began circulating about compromising documents involving his family during the Nazi period. Nothing was ever officially revealed, but what stood out was that, until then, there had been no investigation, no leaks, only fear. And who knew enough to make him back down before there were any accusations? In Hollywood circles, veteran producers and agents speak of discreet associations that guide certain celebrities to avoid specific actions or to accept invitations without question. The terms are never clear, but the results are visible. Actresses who vanish from the spotlight at the peak of their careers, award-winning directors who disappear after unfortunate remarks, screenwriters whose projects are suddenly canceled without explanation. Who pushes that delete button? Among diplomats, a more subtle pattern appears. At official events, certain names receive indirect instructions to avoid contact with specific individuals. Sometimes, a simple exchange of glances is enough to alter the protocol. It's as if a network of silent signals operates alongside formal diplomatic rules. In 2002, during a G8 summit, a curious incident was recorded. A Canadian minister refused to go on stage with a certain businesswoman present. Days later, his name was removed from the list of ministers. He never explained why. Behind the scenes in the music industry, artists report that they lost control of their own careers after refusing certain proposals. The pattern usually includes a private meeting with an unknown woman, outside business hours, and a contract that is never printed, only read aloud. Many refer to it as the pact. And from that point on, everything changes. Either fame skyrockets, or the career begins to quietly collapse. Digital security reports point to an abnormal number of selective leaks that always seem to benefit the same structure. Discreet, well-connected women who never appear directly in scandals. These are leaks that emerge at the exact moment needed to force a resignation, seal a deal, or silence an opponent. The most intriguing part is that these operations are never traceable. They don't follow traditional espionage patterns. They lie beyond the reach of common logic. In 2011, An investigative reporter from London began tracking the case of 3 actresses who, at different times, had been removed after refusing roles in films tied to a particular production company. She discovered that all had received a visit from the same woman, an ex-lawyer now working as an image consultant. Days before publishing the article, the reporter suffered a serious accident and abandoned the case. The investigation was never completed. And what of the silent pacts? Those alliances forged without contracts but with real consequences. A former record executive stated in an anonymous interview that there were groups within the industry that sealed agreements during nighttime meetings, with the mandatory presence of older women who led the ritual. The environment was informal, but what was decided there went beyond business. It was a form of loyalty sealed and enforced with precision. The most frightening aspect is that when someone tries to leave this circle, the consequences are not just professional. A pattern of complete unraveling emerges: loss of credibility, social isolation, and a sequence of inexplicable negative events. In many of these cases, people can't point to a culprit. They simply say that someone pulled the right strings. If these stories were isolated, they could be dismissed as conspiracy theories. But when the patterns repeat across different countries, sectors, and decades, the picture changes. And when there is always a woman in the shadows, quietly observing, suspicion gains weight. The true weapon of the Mothers of Darkness may not be magic or ancient knowledge, but the certainty that no one dares face them directly, because those who do simply disappear. Every secret order, no matter how rational it may seem, tends to have a point of origin that transcends the physical world, a symbol of force and entity. In the case of the Mothers of Darkness, this silent core is known among occult scholars as the Black Mother, a figure that belongs to no specific religion but appears, in varying forms, across distinct mythologies around the world. Always shrouded in darkness, always in control, the image of the Black Mother predates the Christian concept of demons. In Sumerian records, she appears as an underworld goddess, associated with silence and the gestation of the night. In Egypt, she is linked to a forgotten version of Isis, older and lacking the popular maternal traits. In Greece, she is a darker archetype of Hecate, connected not only to magic but to a hidden power that does not need to reveal itself, a power that does not shine but dominates. The cult of the Black Mother was never institutionalized. It existed on the fringes of official worship, often preserved in isolated female communities where the central figure was invoked not as a deity to be worshipped, but as a presence to be consulted. Unlike gods who demand faith, the Black Mother demanded silence, discipline, and transmission. She was not an entity of devotion, but of pact. During the Middle Ages, inquisitorial documents mention a figure called Mater Tenebris. In certain witchcraft trials, the accused women claimed to receive messages from the dark, as if a female entity instructed them in dreams and visions. Curiously, the reports were almost identical even among women who had never met. The description was always the same: a figure dressed in ancient garments with no visible face, surrounded by inward-facing mirrors. In some cases, these women claimed that their knowledge came from the womb of the shadow. They did not study it in books, nor hear it from others, they simply knew. These claims frightened even the most experienced inquisitors, as they did not fit the standard model of heresy. It was something older, deeper, and much harder to eradicate. In the following centuries, symbols associated with the Black Mother began to appear in popular art and religious architecture, always in disguised form. Sculptures of Black Madonnas, for example, appeared in European churches between the 12th and 15th centuries. The Church tried to explain them as exotic representations of the Virgin Mary, but scholars point out clear differences. The face of these images is not serene, it is austere. The gaze is empty, and the cloak always dark as night. In the 19th century, occultists like Eliphas Levi and Pappus mentioned, in private correspondence, a lady of darkness who served as the apex of an underground current of feminine knowledge. They claimed that certain circles of women performed silent invocations during equinoxes and eclipses, and that in each ritual, a chair was left empty so the Black Mother could manifest. These accounts were never published in official books of the time, but survive in letters preserved by Hermetic societies. In modern times, the image of the Black Mother persists, but in an even more veiled manner. In some private institutions dedicated to the study of the occult, she appears as the one who listens. In secret female groups, It is common to begin meetings by turning off the lights, followed by a minute of total silence. When asked why, participants say it's so she can hear what has not yet been said. Who is this she? In African-based spiritual traditions, there is a figure called Ayami Age, the ancestral mothers, powerful female spirits who do not respond to common invocations. They are not gods, not orishes. They are forces. Many priestesses claim that silence is the only way to deal with them. Curiously, the invocation rituals include elements similar to those of the sisterhood: closed circles, absence of names, and coded gestures. Is the connection found between the lines? The theory that unites these elements suggests that the Mothers of Darkness not only preserve a tradition of ancestral feminine power, but that they serve an intelligence, an entity, a presence. Something that does not want to be worshipped, but kept alive. Something that manifests in the transmission of knowledge, in the repetition of patterns, in the existence of an invisible network of control. A consciousness that operates through the silent female voices who govern chaos invisibly. The most unsettling part of this theory is that this entity does not demand sacrifices, cults, or indoctrination. It demands continuity. And that's why each daughter raised in secret, each woman strategically positioned in an institution, each veiled ritual on a moonless night, would be part of an ongoing conversation with this presence. A dialogue spanning centuries. An alliance that cannot be broken without consequences. No one has ever seen the Black Mother, but her traces are everywhere. In repeated symbols, in omitted names, in inexplicable decisions. And perhaps, more than an external entity, she is a force that manifests in those who accept silence as a form of power. If this presence truly exists, could she be watching now? They left no temples, raised no flags, waged no wars, and commanded no armies. And yet, if the theory is true, they helped shape part of the modern world in absolute silence. The Mothers of Darkness do not impose themselves by force, but through a strategy that outlived empires, religions, and revolutions. They mastered the art of secrecy. And perhaps that is the most dangerous kind of power, the one that operates without needing to be named. This story is just one piece, and one day, perhaps you'll see the full puzzle. If this made you think, subscribe and like the video. It helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share. After all, more voices mean more discoveries.